Welcome to the inaugural episode of Recertified Classic. You know, some titles so change the very climate of video games, they themselves become obsolete. Their influence is undeniable, but are they worth revisiting? Are they just quaint reminders of the way things used to be? Leave your nostalgia at the door, because we're taking another look at one of the most revered PlayStation 1 games, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Released in 1997, Symphony of the Night quickly became a cult hit, eventually becoming a greatest hits. It, along with Konami's other successes Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill, is routinely touted as one of the best games on the system. Symphony was the series' first entry in what will be dubbed the Metroid-Vania genre, though in its inception it was only meant to be a one-off side story, just a spin-off from mainstay Castlevania entries. Its success plunged the series into an identity crisis. Tentpole entries unsuccessfully dabbled in 3D, while Symphony's two-dimensional spiritual follow-ups found greater critical and commercial success. It spawned 7 more Metroid-style games and 1 spin-off, though it is often considered still the best one of the bunch. It saw a re-release on XBLA, PSN, and PSP in 2007, the year of its 10th anniversary. There also exists a Japanese-only Sega Saturn version that, while despite having more content, was a sloppy port job done by a different team and as such, features numerous technical shortcomings. Symphony of the Night was created by a small but talented group of people, though it and the Metroid-Vania genre can be credited to one man, Koji Igarashi, or sometimes simply referred to as just Iga. With Iga's Bloodstained very successfully kickstarted, it's time to put the pressure on the one that started it all, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Is it still good? But first, a brief history. Symphony is known in Japan as Nocturne in the Moonlight, and is the sequel to Rondo of Blood, which, if you were wondering, explains the introduction with Richter and why they were packaged together on the PSP. Rondo, a TurboGrafx Super CD game, in its time never saw release in America. In its place was the drastically inferior and now horribly overpriced Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. The earliest incarnation of Symphony started as a 32X game, sometimes referred to as the Bloodletting, though this may have been a different cancelled Castlevania game. Not much is known about this 32X version, or the Bloodletting. It's said to have not been cancelled so much as drastically changed very early on in development. Iga, hot off the heels of the successful dating simulator Tokimeki Memorial, used his newly gained clout to muscle his way into working on a Castlevania game. Again, Symphony was to be a direct follow-up to Rondo with largely the same team, but now with Iga co-directing, among other duties, with Rondo director Toru Hagihara. However, about halfway through production, Hagihara left the project, putting Iga front and center. Symphony would not only redefine the Castlevania series, it would influence games for years to come. Here's the game's most meaningful contributions. Number 1, it cemented the Metroid-Vania genre. Stupid as the term may be, it's absolutely fitting because today, yes, there's Shadow Complex, Dust, Strider, Xeodrifter, Axiom Verge, but for ages, Metroid and Castlevania were really the only ones doing two-dimensional exploration action games, which, by the way, is the term Iga and the Symphony crew use to describe the game. Full stop. If your game is a 2D action platformer that has you exploring a giant map, collecting power-ups, keys, and special weapons, you're ripping off either Super Metroid or Symphony of the Night. In terms of influence and personality, the only game that can walk with the also classic Super Metroid is Symphony, and don't worry, there'll be time to recertify Super Metroid too. Number 2, expanded the Castlevania games. Symphony was initially thought of as simply a side story, and therefore given free rein to experiment with the aging Castlevania framework. One key element the team wanted to address was improving the controls. In interviews, Iga stated he had 3 problems with Castlevania games: the lethargic whip, stiff jump, and unforgiving instant death pits. He still had the utmost respect for the series, though this game needed to be different. The solution was a new lead character, and Alucard was perfect as the new protagonist. The series had already experimented with different characters with different playstyles, and it fits since Alucard fought along Trevor Belmont in Dracula's Curse. This allowed the team to ditch the iconic whip, the vampire killer is canonically a Belmont family heirloom anyway, and give Alucard a sword with a smoother feel. Plus, vampires are traditionally more elegant. It makes sense that his jump would be so otherworldly. For some, this became the standard for Castlevania games. Now, the problem of instant death pits. Iga, quote, hated falling to your death. True, falling off the screen in Symphony only throws the player into another room, lending the game to a more open world feel, which leads us to our next point. Number 3. Used RPG elements in a non-RPG. In addition to addressing the controls, Iga and his team wanted to, quote, extend the game's lifespan. Iga said he was inspired to make Symphony a longer adventure when he saw dozens of Castlevania titles in used game bins. In a matter of hours, players would beat a game and then resell it. The solution was to make the game non-linear. Ironically, Iga claims the inspiration came from Zelda, not Metroid. This would lead to implementing loot and an experience system to give players incentive to explore the sprawling castle. Now, the action RPG was nothing new, but Symphony was an early example of a non-RPG game with RPG elements. Think about your average modern FPS. They've basically just bolted on an experience system to give players incentive to keep playing online matches. While you expect to see this now, it was a bold and unusual choice for the time, which, speaking of bold and unusual. Number 4. It proved 2D could work in the post-3D world. This was the era of 3D. 2 dimensions was old hat. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. The sad reality of early polygonal gaming is that they were all basically crap. Of course there were the classics, but for every one of those classic games are untold piles of, no doubt well-intentioned, but totally forgettable ventures into the 3rd dimension. Iga and his team wanted to make a huge castle for the player and fill it with many different types of enemies. There simply were too many assets for 3D, plus, if they stayed 2D, they could reuse enemies from previous games, which they absolutely did. I imagine it was a tough sell at the time to Konami's movers and shakers, but it proved to the world that 2D games could still be fun and greatly improve upon the previous generation. Symphony may have been 2D like a Super Nintendo, but the Super Nintendo could never do sprites like that. So those are the game's claims to fame, and that's all fine and dandy, but let's get down to brass tacks. Does it still hold up? Is it still a certified classic? And the answer is yes, though it's not without its problems. Let's start at the beginning. Yes, we all love that music, and goddamn, how iconic and hilarious is that dialogue.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
But how are you gonna begin by recapping a game that never came out in America, then start with candles needing a relic to produce items, and then just spring sub-weapons on players without any real indication of how to use them? Again, we're looking at this without nostalgia classes. If this is your very first Castlevania game, I can understand how this could be really confusing. But this confusion doesn't last long. By the time you beat the first boss, you're well on your way to enjoying an incredible game. Until you, spoilers, get to Richter, defeat him, only to find out that that's the worst ending. Props to Iga and his team for gating 50% of the game. That is colossal balls. What, there's more? Like a lot more? Holy shit! But this excitement quickly wears off because really it's just the same castle, but upside down. With new bosses, yes, but mostly the same enemies, and one song that is way overused. The inverted castle always seemed like an afterthought or an 11th hour decision to me. You see, to get the best ending you need to fully explore both castles, but since they didn't reset how the map is covered, you spend most of the time tracing the ceiling with the bat or mist. It's frankly a chore that comes across as really sloppy. It's always a tough call to say which is worse, a game that botches the dismount or doesn't stick the landing, but Symphony manages to somehow do both. And I'm not just talking about the awful song that plays over the credits. In all my research, I never found an explanation for I Am the Wind. Not to mention the game's difficulty can be completely removed with a few extremely exploitable items and special moves. Entire rooms can be avoided altogether if you have the second level missed. Shield Rod's secret power makes quick work of most bosses, and Alucard's special magic moves are way overpowered and can be performed at any time. It comes across as unfocused, giving the player too many options. People often consider Symphony to be unequivocally the best Metroid-Vania, but gameplay-wise, Iga would make huge leaps to refine this blueprint. No, for me it's between Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow, and while Iga had nothing to do with it, I'll always have a soft spot for Circle of the Moon. The Metroid-Vania games that followed in its wake featured castles with better flow, better pacing, better distribution of loot, but this is still an incredibly enjoyable game. Scrubbing every inch of that inverted castle may have been a chore, but I did it. I did it multiple times. This is because the combat is so satisfying. Why rob yourself the pleasure by cheesing or skipping areas? Yes, EGOT would go on to perfect the Metroid formula, but none would ever have the sheer number of things as Symphony. It's plainly obvious, but it has been confirmed in interviews, that a team of incredibly talented designers were given free rein to create whatever crazy things they wanted. Enemies, bosses, voice clips, sound effects, a variety of areas, meaningless Easter eggs, tiny decorations. It's incredible this game doesn't completely collapse under the weight of it all. Speaking just of its visual presentation, yes, this absolutely is the greatest Metroid-Vania game and one of the greatest games ever made. Words cannot adequately articulate how satisfying it is just to move Alucard. Just that. There still may not exist better pixel art. If art design and character animation are your thing, this game has nearly unlimited replay, studying the unique attack patterns and death animations of each of the game's bosses and enemies. The core game can be beaten in less than 10 hours, but you can almost physically drown in the game's unrivaled attention to detail. Or, if I can speak from a more personal level, that is to say nothing of its soundtrack. The variety in style, tone, instrumentation, and just the sheer amount of catchy, brilliant melodies puts me at a loss for words. To say this game inspired my personal musical endeavors would be an understatement, save for that head-scratching credits music. Playing this game again, I realized, in the face of its faults, I still could not put it down. Style for days, satisfying combat, with maybe the generation's greatest soundtrack, Symphony of the Night is a classic worthy of its reputation. Though I think calling it the greatest Metroidvania gives it too much credit and undermines the gameplay improvements of the DS and GBA games that followed in its wake. Still, I can confirm that Symphony of the Night is a certified classic. Hey, thanks for watching. Huge thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon. If you would like to support the show, feel free to do that, or just like, comment, and subscribe. That's another great way to support. Check out other videos, check out the social media links below, and thanks again for watching.
Try to lean forward at the end. I think that's the punch.
Okay.
Certified.
Certified classic. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, certified classic.
Yep. Can you use
Certified
classic in a sentence, please?
This game is a certified classic.
wait. Ask me to say Okay, here.
Can you use it?
Your word is certified classic.
Can you use it in a sentence?
This game. No. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a certified classic.
S?
No.